This week on SDC, we're looking at major security issues with Google's Chrome browser and telling you exactly what you need to do, what you need to know about updating your iPhone, and some of this might be a surprise given other advice you may have received, and WhatsApp could be facing the most significant changes in years and could be a major issue to its 2 billion users.
It's been a bit of a hectic week or so for Chrome users, but also for those people who use Edge or Brave, Opera, Vivaldi, or any of the myriad browsers that are powered by the same Chromium engine. Things kicked off last week with a very rare, to be honest, emergency update, and I call it an emergency update because it was a security update addressing just one vulnerability that Google warned was being exploited in the wild by attackers. And the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, has even issued an operational directive now requiring all federal agencies to upgrade. But the one thing I can't tell you is what that problem was, because Google hasn't made that public and isn't going to until the majority of users are updated. But the problems don't end there from the security perspective, because now we've also hit Google 100, which, despite lots of media doom and gloom, doom scrollers telling us was going to break the internet, it did no such thing, of course. But what it did do was fix another 28 vulnerabilities.
So, David, how does the fixes for Chrome, or how do the fixes for Chrome affect Chromium browsers, and which browsers are based on Chromium? And what is Chromium for some people who might not know? Well,
Chromium is the rendering engine that underlies, that powers the browser. So Chrome is the best known, obviously, because it's the one that started it all. But Microsoft Edge is a Chromium-based browser. Brave, which is the browser of my choice at the minute that I'm using, is based on Chromium. The likes of Opera, Vivaldi, but there's tons and tons and tons of them that they're actually based on Chromium. Now, so what that means is, if there's a vulnerability that impacts Chrome that's in the Chromium engine, then it's going to affect every other browser that's using Chromium. And that's what we've seen. Now, how that affects you from the updating perspective is interesting, because Google will update Chrome, and generally speaking, that's going to get updated first. So those updates are going to roll out quicker than the other browsers. How quickly the other browsers react, we don't really know. I mean, some of them act almost immediately, others take a day or two, but those couple of days could be important when we've got a vulnerability like this 0 day that's being exploited in the wild. We don't know who the attackers are. We don't know exactly what the exploit is. We know the vulnerability is in the JavaScript V8 engine in Chromium, but that's it. I mean, it could be anybody exploiting this for any purpose. So it's important to get it updated quickly.
It's always, I guess, it's good to know that Google's taking time out from tracking people across the internet to patch the security vulnerability. So we should be grateful.
Actually, no, we should be grateful, because it's easy to look at these updates and say, well, 28 security updates in Google 100, that's appalling. But actually, I think it's a sign of the security maturity of Google, because their processes for discovering these vulnerabilities, their bug bounty platforms, their internal processes are working, and they're finding them and they're fixing them. Now, that's far better than there being 28 vulnerabilities that aren't being fixed and could well be being used by attackers as 0 day.
Yeah, and that's very similar to Apple, isn't it? There've been a lot of emergency fixes for Apple over the last 12 months or so, and a lot of people have asked, well, is Apple any less secure? But actually, we could say that more vulnerabilities are being found, they're being fixed, and people are getting the updates more quickly. So that's a good thing, right? One of the interesting things that came out this week was we finally found out why those who've enabled automatic updates don't actually get the updates from Apple straight away automatically. It can take a week or two actually for you to have that automatic update on your phone, which you know, it's pretty bad, isn't it? Because if you're somebody who would have asked for automatic updates, which I have enabled on my phone, for example, you're probably a person who cares about security, or somebody who needs to keep their phone up to date for work, for example. And I am very proactive at checking for updates, mainly because I write about Apple and I need to know when they're coming, and also for myself. But the reason for that is apparently if any bugs come out when the update happens, that Apple can fix it before the others are getting the automatic update. And also it may be just so that Apple's servers aren't hammered with everybody updating at the same time, which actually makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
but it is strange.
Do we know how these updates are rolled out? Is it regionally done? So are different regions getting updates at different times? Is it just scattergun random?
No, there's unfortunately no detail other than, yes, this does happen. And the reason that this happens is because of bugs, which is what came out from one of the Apple execs who was actually asked that question. But what we can learn from that is that, you know, we always say this, go and check for updates on your phone. It doesn't take a minute to do that. You'll kind of know when they're coming, the big ones anyway, you know when to expect them, especially if you check our videos and our page. We're always talking about the feature updates. They often come with security. Sometimes we get an emergency security update, and that's what the news is for in a way as well, isn't it? That's what our purpose is, to let people know those updates are here and not just to leave it to be updated automatically.
It sounds, I mean, it's a bit stupid if we're being honest, right? And it sounds like an excuse to manage server balancing, because, you know, people that have ticked the box to get automatic updates, ignore it. I genuinely can't remember. I've got a box ticked. I can't remember my phone ever automatically updating. And I'm not, you know, the next day, I'm not like on it that morning in the way that you might be, Kate, but, you know, certainly, you know, you always get frustrated. It's been out for a while and it's like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And then you just go and do an update. Apple would be better off pushing a message out, just saying update available, click here. That would be far more effective, because the problem is they're caught between two stools at the moment, and it's a very suboptimal situation.
And of course, this is reminiscent of the Android situation with Android phones. It's such a fractured ecosystem. It was the reason that I jumped ship from Android to the iPhone, for example, is because I was fed up of waiting too long for security updates to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking of operating systems, there is another thing happening in the Apple world at the moment, which is everyone's preparing for WWDC, the developers conference, where we see the big announcements of the year from Apple, and that takes place in June. By the time the video is uploaded, we might actually have a date for that, because the invitations tend to go out around now, so kind of April time. What we'll be seeing a lot of is iOS 16. So what are we going to see with iOS 16? There haven't really been any major rumors as far as security and privacy goes, but what we do want, and what we've discussed before on this show, is more privacy features for anti-tracking, more transparency, for example, and more kind of on the ATT factor, because it's a great feature by Apple, but it doesn't really, although it's supposed to, cover all tracking, and fingerprinting has still been able to happen, i.e. people can be uniquely identified via the tracking that is done and is still able to happen. So in my mind, I want more of that, but we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of it.
So that might be things getting better. I'm looking at something getting worse, which is, you know, Europe's doing what Europe does and thinking, you know, it's time for a little bit of a medal. So, you know, as in not an awarded medal, but an interfering medal in messaging. So for those of us of a certain age, we'll remember when interoperability hit SMS, and it was fantastic. You could suddenly send messages to other networks. It was like a big deal. So now apparently we're you know, there's talk of interoperability in end-to-end secure text messaging, which is clearly a complete non-starter and nonsense, misunderstands how it works, and will introduce all manner of different security vulnerabilities that it would be quite difficult to get your head around. But that's coming. WhatsApp has started to signal the warnings and all the rest of it. But what I'm looking at, and it picks up on something we covered extensively last year, is, you know, WhatsApp has transcended the kind of social media messaging applications. It's actually become what I refer to as like a quasi-global mobile phone network. Particularly in developing parts of the world, it's used as a phone network. You know, the numbers of calls and, you know, voice messages, video calls, and the rest of it on WhatsApp are staggering. It has become so significant, almost like a key critical infrastructure platform in so many parts of the world, which led to some of the kind of the backlash when it talks about tighter integration with Facebook and all the rest of it. So I think we've reached the place now where we've got to stop treating WhatsApp like Signal and Telegram or WhatsApp. It's not the same. WhatsApp has transcended that, shouldn't be part of Facebook from a, you know, I guess, strategic perspective. It should be its own regulated platform. It can clearly generate a return, but I think this is going to push into sharp relief some of the issues with messing around with something that's used by that many people, you know, all of the time.
What about TikTok? Everybody thinks that's just about dancing, but that's not actually true, is it?
Well, it might be about dancing for you, Dave, but others are using it for the reasons. You know what? TikTok's really interesting. I covered TikTok a lot last year, and we looked at security vulnerabilities and the issues with the potential it could be influenced by the Chinese government, and what would that do from an influencer platform, given how extensively it's used. We've seen something of a watershed with what's taken place in Ukraine, where it's been referred to in some media as almost like the TikTok's war, where you've seen TikTok as a genuine source of news. Yes, there's misinformation, disinformation on the platform, as there are on any other platforms. I don't believe any more so than we're seeing on Twitter or Facebook or any of the other big platforms. But its ability to reach a particular segment of the audience is unmatched. We saw that in Facebook's results when it warned of the TikTok factor. And if you like, it's really come into its own. What's most interesting, though, is the contrast between TikTok and Huawei, right? So the two Chinese technology platforms that transcended domestic China, if you like, and really became almost westernized in their reach, both of which were kind of hit hard by Trump's backlash against Chinese technology when he was president of the US. Huawei has really kind of become much more Chinese. You know, it's obviously been hit really hard by some of the restrictions, but it's heavily in Russia. I've talked before about some of its infrastructure on the ground in Russia, its support for the kind of the state and all the rest of it. We're seeing that now. Conversely, TikTok is really peddling a line. It would be hard to tell the difference between TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and the US platforms in terms of what it's doing. So I generally think this is a watershed moment. I think TikTok has transcended its Chinese ownership, and Huawei has gone in the opposite direction. And I suspect we'll see some ramifications from that beyond whatever happens on the ground in Eastern Europe.